Next, the State of New York Self-Help Support System, David Pillard and Mayor Violet Trost.
Thank you.
Will be the presenters.
In New York State, conservative estimates of the need for rural repairs and maintenance and constructions of water and wastewater systems in rural areas in populations of 5,000 or less are in the billions of dollars, the estimates of those needs. Yet even on the national level, those monies are not available for the entire country. So the traditional response of waiting for federal or state grants or even on borrowing 85% free money and bonding out the 15% are not realistic. Self-Help is a coalition of 3 state agencies, the Rensselaer Institute and the Ford Foundation, that essentially work with small rural communities under the population of 5,000 to rediscover their own birthright of independent initiative and feeling that community-based solutions are the best solutions. We center our focus on not money, on not equipment, not on different kinds of financial strategies, but our key central focus is on a spark plug, a human being at the local level who is willing to follow through and maintain the energy and the effectiveness to make sure that we go step by step to complete a project. Of course, we do use financing mechanisms, but they're not the financing mechanisms of getting more money. It's the mechanism of saving money. We do use equipment, but it's not purchase of equipment. It's the lending and leasing and borrowing and et cetera of equipment. Finally, we look to the people, both volunteers and supported and replicated kind of individuals from other communities and from their own community to produce the kind of work needed to finish the job and put it in the ground. Since 1986, about 130 communities have been completed projects with savings in excess of $20 million to the taxpayer. These projects also, we tried to replicate them in different sections of the United States. We're in 10 different states working with the Environmental Protection Agency and the Rensselaer Institute in replicating them in the same manner throughout those states. We also have found that these principles of self-help can be replicated in other programs in New York State. We're working with the Office of Mental Retardation, Developmental Disabilities to transition their communities from large institutions into neighborhoods using self-help, and with housing and community renewal also. My final point before I introduce one of our spark plugs is that this program depends principally on the energy of human beings that believe in themselves, whereas before a lot of our system says you can't do it, you're amateurs. I'd like to introduce one of those amateurs who's quite extraordinary. Violet?
Thank you, David. I'm from upstate New York, a little village of 1,208 people, and we had a desperate problem. We had a terrible water bill. We were paying our neighboring city, who we bought the water from, about $65,000 in excess of what the water cost, and all they were doing was letting it flow through the pipes from the city of Oneida. We were in the predicament that we would have to raise the water rates, so this needed attention. We called self-help, and we looked at it entirely differently than what we had looked at it, and joined with the town of Vernon in a marriage of sorts, and were able to extend our water lines out through the town, and we picked up 50 or so new customers who didn't have water or water that wasn't usable, and we did it in a different way. We did it in a straightforward way, and self-help made themselves available to us. Their expertise, if they didn't have the answers, they found them for us, and the confidence they had in our humble abilities. It's very rewarding when someone comes into your office and said, I've waited 20 years for that water, and you people made it happen. I'm not a politician. Vernon is small. I've enjoyed my 2 days. I feel very humble this is all very overwhelming to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Here we have questions from Harriet to begin with.
I'm just curious, how did this begin? I mean, did it begin out of the problems or out of the inspiration from a foundation or?
The Rensselaerville Institute came to, they had experimented with this in an Indian reservation in Oklahoma, Cherokee Nation. And they came to New York State wondering if it could be applied in a state system across a whole bureaucracy. And they brought it to us, and then we took it to the other agencies, and then from there we did not ask for new resources. We simply asked, can we let your existing resources use a new set of tools to save some money rather than spend it, etc. And that's how we started back in '87. And then from there built, essentially we have a small staff of about a dozen people total, but for every one of those staff members, we have county health department and DEC engineers, et cetera, and private engineers who multiply that by about 20 times per individual.
Max Sherman.
The quality of the teams would be a very key ingredient to this. How do you assure the quality, and do you run into resistance in various agencies as someone is away from their normal task to come and to offer the assistance around the state?
Self-help was probably the first state department that found out where Vernon was. We had begun to wonder. They came out to Vernon, and there are other agencies that help us out, but self-help was there for us.
I would comment further that the teams, we get together, first of all, on the town turf, and all of the
Could you take me back a step to the formation of the team, how you get those people?
We went essentially to those agencies. We targeted environmental conservation as an example, which is involved in this kind of service. At the time that we started this in '86, the construction grants program was dying. So we knew that those were people, very talented engineers, who would be sharp to find something to do. And we essentially went right to them and said, there is another tool you can use. You don't need all that federal money. So we can sit down with you and show you the use of those tools to get communities that even with the money had been unwilling to complete their projects. And so that's how we started.
Any other questions? Max Sherman has one more.
What would happen if some of the loan funds cease to exist, as did the federal funds? What happens to self-help?
Well, I'll give you an example that some of the negotiations that have been going on between a local government and a banker are extraordinary. Violet can tell you just one little story about when she visited her banker, who had originally said that I think I can give you something at 6 or 7%. This is what happened.
We went back to the banker, who agreed that we had paid too much money for water for a number of years. He lived in our village, and he agreed to give us the money, the loan, for 1% above the prime rate. And this is the way we've regulated it. So we're really better off than we would have been with a federal loan.
Harriet?
I realize that these are in rural areas. Do you find any problems in terms of construction and unions and traditional jurisdictions, and how do you negotiate that?
The day we announced the program, I got back to my office, and the AFL-CIO, the construction industry of New York State, and the Engineering Association of New York State was in my office. And they were very upset because they thought I was going to take business from their constituencies. Out of that came two things. One, that we sat down and explained to them that they had no business in these rural areas. They were losing business because the rural areas had no way of coming up with the retail costs of these projects. So actually it could be a marketing tool for them. But then we had to make a very painful agreement with them. We agreed even though there may be dramatic savings